Hey everyone, this is Pooja Chilukuri, and welcome to another episode of the Afterlife podcast. In this episode today, I'm very excited to interview Angela Coulter. I hope I said your name right, Angela.
Yes, yes, you did.
And Angela and I met at a networking event and we connected instantly. She resonated with me because she's also very interested in afterlife, near-death experiences, and we connected. And I was very curious about her experiences. And when she started sharing, I knew I needed to get her on this show. Angela has been a dedicated consciousness transformation guide and a life up-leveling coach since 2011. She's on a mission to help you and I to navigate our past life hurdles and to discover our full potential. Welcome to the show, Angela.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. Yeah, I loved how we connected. Yeah, because we have so much in common.
I do too. And I feel like sometimes it's kind of like I don't know, the synchronicities are amazing. And I love
Mhm.
that.
Yes.
And I know you've had some spiritual experiences of your own as far back as your childhood, and then you've been on this journey to
Yes.
help others. So you can start wherever it makes sense for you. We would love to hear it all.
Well, I know you. Well, this is the Afterlife podcast, right? So
Yes.
we can start with it's really interesting because I never think about the near-death experience I had as a child as relevant to anything. And it came to me recently. I was like, oh, that's really interesting. I did. I actually almost drowned, or I did drown when I was like 4 or 5 years old in a pool. And I remember seeing myself. I remember being out of my body and seeing me under the water and all that kind of stuff, and then coming to. But I never really connected that with anything else. I was just like, oh, yeah, I was a kid. So what? Just keep on moving on. I had my first I guess I just knew it's interesting. I don't know when it started. I always knew stuff, right? I was brought up in a very pious family. My father was very involved with the church, and I remember going to Bible school and going, "Yeah, I don't think that's how it happened." And I didn't really agree with a lot of the stuff that they said, but then I was a kid. I'm like, I'm not gonna say anything. But it didn't really resonate with me, the authenticity of it. But I started having the first interaction I had with somebody who had passed over was my great grandmother the night she died when I was like 11 years old, and she was in the hospital, and my everybody had gone to the hospital and didn't want to wake me up, but that's what they did back then. They just left me there. And I woke up and she was sitting on the corner of my bed and she just said, I love you. And I knew she died. I knew she was dying. So fast forward, like all through, I would say I was always so very empathic. Like I was always so very connected to other people. I had a lot of anger in my household growing up, and I would sit in my bedroom and cry because I didn't know why. Like I would just be overwhelmed. I had to just avoid. And I learned at a very early age to eat that either you become a marshmallow of a mess or you can shut down, and sort of put a steel cage around it, and control it. And I sort of did that. So I remember though going through my teenage years, and I always knew when somebody was lying to me. I always knew like if they were being inauthentic. And I would have premonitory dreams that I really got very clearly once I hit my late teens. I picked up this book, and it's really funny that I still have this book, and I didn't purposely save it. But when this all came to my forefront, like 15 years ago, and I'll get to that in a minute, I picked up this book and it was called Instant ESP. And the last name of the author was St. Clair. But it was like all these little exercises on how to connect with the dead, how to astral project, how to do a past life regression, how to do all these kind of things. And I thought these were just like play games because it was so easy for me. And I never even realized that it was like any kind of anything special. So, yeah. So in my 20s, the dreams got really vivid. I had a lot of premonitory stuff that was really odd. And I just had these connections, and I was excellent in corporate America. And I progressed very rapidly as a manager because I could read a room when I walked in.
Mhm.
And I could tell if somebody was smiling and they were just really angry underneath and they were hiding something. And I would be able to step aside and be like, hey, what's going on? And be able to really connect with people. So I was very natural at managing people. So I progressed really quickly with that. And then I left and started my own business. And I had a spiritual awakening in 2009, even though I had a lot of stuff before. Oh, wait, let me back up. Starting in 2000, so I say it was 2009, but when my father died in 2002, I had a constant stream of those who had transitioned coming to visit me. Yeah, because and in that like 7 years from 2002 2009, when I had what I call my grand spiritual awakening, I had something like 6 or 7 people in my immediate family pass away. And it was like they never left because we would have a big old party. And a lot of times it'd be when I go to sleep, or it would be a meditation, or they would just be there. My dad would uh, announce himself by playing music in my head because he used to listen to like Frank Sinatra. And all of a sudden I would be in a meeting and some Frank Sinatra song would just start blaring in my head. So like I had all those kind of things go on. And so then it became so commonplace for me. Right. Then I have my what I call my grand awakening, but I'm like, really, it was going on for a really long time. And then it was like the whole universe opened up. And that was in 2009. And I suddenly just knew things. I heard things, I saw things. I thought I was going crazy at first. And then I became voracious because a friend of mine, I was guided to go talk to a friend of mine who I had no idea knew anything about any of this. And back in 2009, there was not the preponderance of information on the internet as there is today. So I went and talked to a friend of mine, and she made me feel okay because I felt like I was going crazy. And then it just went from there. And then I became voracious, and I took all these classes and all this kind of stuff. And I had a different business at the time, and I was really guided and pushed very heavily within like 18 months of all this to start doing it and helping other people with it. So yeah. And then I did. It was scary because I had to get over my own stuff, and then I started working with that. So yeah, and all kinds of stuff from that. And then I originated a modality that came into me in 2011. I started teaching it in 2012. I have a couple hundred
Mhm.
practitioners. It's called Trinity Energy Progression. And I'm evolving that because of where I feel like I am today. But it's sort of like this blend of the spiritual and the physical that is it's completely fluid.
That's fascinating, Angela. I have many questions. So I don't want to forget any one of them, but I was listening to you, I was so mesmerized, I forgot to write them down. But my first question is, childhood NDEs, are you familiar with the works of Dr. Atwater,
I've
Pam?
heard of him, but I have not. I've not.
She um she
Sorry, yeah.
actually has done a lot of studies with children who've had NDEs. And
Hmm.
one of the things that has come out of that is a lot of times people having NDEs, especially in childhood or at any time, really, they come back with gifts that they're not even aware of. And so, I don't know if that had anything to do with you being able to see your great grandmother, but it sounds like you were very open right from childhood. So, my first question is, when you saw her, did you tell anyone? And were you afraid that no one would believe? Yeah.
No, of course I didn't, because I was a kid, and yeah, no one would believe me, or they would just say, "Oh, well, she's just upset." And but like it was, I could feel her weight on the end of my bed, and I just, I just knew it was her.
Yeah.
It
And
was.
even with you being able to feel your dad and other family members that have passed, uh, how did you integrate that into your life? Like, I, I don't know what that's like.
It.
So,
I found it very entertaining. I was like, oh, this adds some color to everyday life, right? Um, I sort of laughed though, because when this was all happening with me, like that was when all of these TV shows started coming out, like Medium, if you remember that show, and
Mhm.
The Ghost Whisperer, right? They started becoming really, and I kept on, I would watch these and go, that's not how I experience it. They're just there like people, or they're here like a blink, or I just know that they're there. Like, so I think it's different for everybody, the experiences.
Yeah.
But I literally one time with my dad, when this happened with my father, like this was before I started doing this, doing this kind of work as a business, right? So I had another business and I was doing marketing for small businesses at the time. And I was in a meeting with this client one time. And it was an older gentleman, and that we really, like we would chat a lot about stuff in life and all that kind of stuff. And we did start talking about spiritual things because he was very versed in all that. And my dad just came in blaring, and I couldn't, it was so loud in my head, I couldn't even focus on the conversation I was having with this client. And after like 5 minutes, I would say, "Could you repeat that, please?" And like I was thinking, "Oh, he's gonna think I'm nuts." So finally, I just said, "Okay, I have to stop. Just give me a second, please. I need to go to the bathroom." So I go to the bathroom, and I was sort of like, "Dad, seriously." But my father actually had a message for this guy because
Oh,
he identified with him because of something he had said
yeah.
or whatever. And and that's why he was so desperately trying to get my attention, right? So I came back in and I was like, okay. The funny part is I've never really thought much about saying, oh, well, so and so says this, like, because I can hear it. Can't you hear that? But I said to him, so let me tell you what's been going on. And I told him, and I said, so my dad has a message for you, and I can't remember what it was, and I gave it to him. And he got quiet for a minute and he said, that actually really hit home on something that I didn't even know about. And he said, so thank you. And I was like, okay, you're welcome. So glad we had this session on this, that it wasn't even planned. So it just sort of integrated. I'll tell you one of the funniest experiences I had was my grandmother after she passed. And that was right before what I had, my grand awakening, whatever. She passed away and she was so vivid, like that I could see her out of
Mm.
the corner of my eye. She was always standing next to me. And she lived in Virginia at the time. And I went up to Virginia to meet my mother at her place because my grandfather had passed away 10 months before her. Like, you want to talk about, this is a couple that they had been together forever, passed away
Mhm.
very close to each other. So the whole time I was in the car, I could smell her perfume. I could see her sitting in the passenger seat, my grandmother, and she was talking to me and telling me all these things. And when I got to the apartment, I told my mother, because I had never mentioned this to her before or anybody in my family. And I said, so grandma's been with me ever since yesterday. And she's, I can't even remember. She said this, and my mother started laughing, like, oh, haha, funny. And I was like, okay, but she's standing here. So remember Furbies? So Furbies were these little um stuffed animals, right? They
Oh,
had a mechanician inside of them so that they would have conversations with you, right? So you would
mhm,
say something,
mhm.
they say something back.
Yeah.
So my grandfather had bought my grandmother this Furby for one of their anniversaries, and it never worked. It was sitting up on a shelf in our apartment. So we were going through, so first of all, we were looking for a key to a cabinet that we had no idea where it was. And it had a whole bunch of stuff that she had left to people in her will and all that. So we were looking through all that and we couldn't find the key. And finally I stood there, I was like, Grandma, where is the key? And so there's silence for a minute. And then she told me exactly where it was. And I go to where she told me, and it was there. So I got the key and it worked. It worked on the cabinet. And so, my mother's like, oh, where'd you find it? And I said, well, Grandma told me. And then she laughed again. So later on, we're in her living room, we're going through stuff. And I very much felt my grandmother decided to go after my grandfather went. She just didn't want to be here because she was completely healthy when he died. And then she just died within a year of him.
Mhm.
Right. So we were going through, and she had one of those old Hallmark books, you know, where you like mark with the birthdays every month, because
Yes.
she would always get people's cards and stuff. So I'm looking through, I had opened up the book, and on the day my grandfather passed away, it said, "The day Anthony left me." And I was like, "Oh, Mom, look at this." And I read this, and all of a sudden the Furby says, "I'm sorry."
Oh my goodness.
And
Oh,
I bursted out laughing, right? Because I knew that it was my grandmother. And then it said something else. And my mother looks at that thing and she turned white as a sheet. And I had a box that I was taking home of stuff that, you know, like of my grandmother's. And my mother goes over and I'm laughing. And she's like, she couldn't, and she's like flipping the switch and it was still talking. It wouldn't stop. And so then she finally takes it over to the box. She pulls out the batteries and she throws it in the box and she goes, "You take it." I still have it. It's never spoken again. I'm just saying.
oh, oh, oh my goodness. That'll make a believer out of anybody.
Right? Right?
Oh, that was perfect timing.
Mhm.
Oh, wow, Angela. A lot of us, one of the reasons I started this podcast is so much grief and pain when we're separated from our loved ones, when they transition.
Yes.
And just hearing stories like yours, the other people that I've interviewed, it brings me a lot of hope, a lot of comfort. So, I can't even imagine what it's like to be grieving and missing someone and be communicating with them at the same time.
Right.
That would really mess me up.
Well, I think it actually softens it. It like, because what I tell people is they never go away, even as they assimilate back into, the universe, and if they reincarnate or however, they cycle, their essence is still connected to you and you can still connect to it out there. And I don't ever feel like they've left. I have had such personal experiences with people passing away, and being there when they've passed and feeling the lightness of them as they leave the body, like the freedom. I've had clients over the years, and they now have the entire death doula field now that helps people with transitioning in a much more peaceful way. And
Mhm.
but I've helped clients over the years with their pets when they've had to take their pets to the vet. I've sat with them in the vet while they've had to put their pets down, and I've told them every time, every single time, the animal feels so free as soon as they just pop right out of the body and they're like, "Oh, oh, I'm free."
Yeah.
Especially when they're older and sick and very limited. But same thing with people most of the time. It's very peaceful and freeing to me. So to me, it's very comforting to be able to feel that,
Yeah.
because I just feel like I and I've told people that I loved who were sick and holding on for family members, I would go and whisper in their ear, "We love you and you can go, because I don't want you to suffer. I don't want anybody to suffer." I think sometimes we don't realize that we want somebody to stay and it's all because of us, and there's no judgment on that, but it's just to realize that it's all about us.
Yeah.
So it's freeing to me. It's a graduation. So you're done with this life. It's time for you to move into whatever's next. And so my grandfather, when he passed, he had said, he was a good old Irishman, and said, "When I go, I want y'all to have a party for me. I want you to go to a pub, an Irish pub. I want you to sing Irish songs and have a good time." And that's what we did. He had he was his ashes were put into Arlington because he was in World War II. So we all went up to Arlington. We did the sad ceremony, and then we went to an Irish pub and we actually sang Irish pub songs. And it was a great way to honor him
Yeah.
going out.
Yeah. Yeah, Angela. I hear you, It's I don't know, grief is a very interesting thing, but being able to celebrate and honor what the person that transitions, it's a celebration for them. And being able to tap into that, I think that's a blessing. It's
Yeah,
a blessing.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And one of the words I heard you use is awakening. And I'm curious because y to me, you were pretty awake as a child. So when you say awakening, what do you really mean?
I mean that I ignored it for years. And finally, my higher self, as many people would call it, or the expanded self, whatever, finally said, yeah, no more shutting this down. And it's almost like so some people have that awakening through like a near death experience. This wasn't that way for me at all, or there was no trauma. I was actually in a good place in my life. And I woke up one morning, it was like 5 o'clock in the morning, and there are these beings standing around my bed and they're talking about me. And I hear them and I hear my husband's thoughts in his dreams sleeping next to me. And it was very disconcerting. And I was having what they call a Kundalini opening, a Kundalini awakening is like I had my body was all on pins and needles, and I just felt like the whole universe had opened up to me. So it was literally, I woke up that way one day and it was, you can't ignore this any longer because it had always been there. And I look back today, I look back and you're right. I say, well, honestly, I've had this inherent and around me for most of my life, but I just chose to ignore it because it took a bunch of healing work for me to be able to accept that because culturally we still think it's weird, right? Because you said as a child, did I not tell anybody, right? I wrote a blog on my site back in November about that, about how it surprised me. Like today, it's great. We have so many TV shows and movies coming out about people having, accessing their abilities because we all have it. We all have the ability to do it. It's about where our mind shuts it out.
Hmm.
And a lot of times we shut it out because we're afraid of it and we're afraid of what people are going to think. They're going to think we're crazy. We think we're crazy. We judge it because there's all of this stigma around it, all of these cultural expectations around it versus honestly, it's our natural state. And
Mm.
when we make it normalized, to be able to do that is just a matter of remembering, not learning how to do it, but remembering how to do it. Because kids, if you look at most kids, they're pretty open and sensitive.
Hmm.
And I
Hmm.
think we unteach them how to do that because we're like, no, 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 you have to stop pretending, or whatever.
Oh, as soon as you said that, a story popped in my head. I used to be a teacher in a toddler classroom, and this one kid, every time I would lay him down for a nap, he would stare at a very particular, space, very fixed, and he would be talking to someone. I
Mm,
couldn't see it. And, it didn't look like he was imagining or it was very serious. So yeah, I agree. I
yeah.
think we shut down at some point. We were very in touch and then we shut down at some point. I guess kids are in tune and we do kind of beat that out of us as
Well,
we
because
go.
culturally we have all these things. I was at a meeting last night. It was like one of the like a business networking meeting, and I was talking to this gentleman who's a real estate agent, and I was talking about, well, have you ever had if you ever had anybody the need for anybody to do say a house clearing, because I do healing work and I can do house clearings as well. I've done so many of them over the years. And he asked me a whole bunch of questions because he had actually never thought of that. And to me, I'm like, of course you want your house in the right energy when you're selling it or buying it or whatever. And he said to me something about like, so tell me, like tell me what you do and how you go about that. And I said, well, it depends on the house. And I said, but I will tell you, I had a friend who wanted me to come and clean her house because her daughter was very sensitive and was like, Mom, there's things here, and have Angela come and do something. so I went to her house and we were talking about it. And her husband, who was that we were friends, he was like, so what do you do? And with a totally straight face, I looked at him and I said, well, I bring a chicken in and cut off its head, and wherever it runs is where all the energy is, like clogged, right? And he looks at me for a minute and then he started laughing because he knows I'm very sarcastic that way or cynical or whatever. Because people have this expectation of what we've seen in movies, right? You see all these crazy things going on, And I was talking to I was telling this real estate agent that, and then I said, so in your head, when I say house clearing, do you think of things like Poltergeist, like the movie Poltergeist? And he said, yeah, I sort of do. I'm like, it is almost never like that.
Yes.
It's these cultural like norms and the commercialization. And of course, we want to make it dramatic in the movies and in books and stuff, but it's really, in my experience, it's the energy and like experiencing beings in other dimensions and people who've passed over. It's really not scary when you're not afraid of it. You know, we fear, what's the Marie Curie thing? We fear what we don't understand.
Hmm.
And when we do start to understand it, it's just like, oh, well, then how do I incorporate this?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think having conversations like this, that it helps me. It
Yeah.
really helps me to, yes, there is. And I've seen you in flesh and blood, Angela. So it's not, so I'm like, wow, I actually know someone that has, because I've met a lot of people because of being a member of the International Association of Near-Death Studies,
Uh-huh.
that have had these experiences. And one by one, meeting them in person makes the story very real to me. I can
Yes.
connect with it. It's more authentic to me. So thank you for taking this time to do this. I do have one question about when you couldn't ignore it any longer, was there something that happened that pushed you out of that corporate life and got you into this space where you're helping other people? Or would it just
So
gradually, you just gradually sort
So
of
what happened, it was funny. What happened was I literally just had the voice in my head that said, get out, like get out of corporate. And I was really successful. I had the paycheck and the position that I had wanted. It was like, I was a global director for $1 billion company. It was a great job. Um, it was stressful. I wasn't really happy because then I was having to do the politics with the ivory tower kind of thing. And I was pretty young for it. But it was literally just, yeah, get out. This isn't what you're here to do. And that was after 17 years of building a career. So I actually left to start an organic herb nursery completely out of left field because I'd never done anything like that actually, or even, except that I was like a gardener. And so I feel like I've always, like I said, I look back now, and even though I would say 2009 is when I was really awakened, I left corporate in 2006. So it was 3 years before that happened, but all of this stuff had been happening, with people passing away before I even left corporate. But like, and when I look back, I feel like every major decision that I've made in my life, I've always had that voice that was very clear and just said, yeah, do this. Not panicked or angry or, fearful. It would be just very certain. And a lot of people say to me, how do you know things? Right.
Mhm.
And it's a hard thing to explain because it's almost like everything feels right in my body when I know it's right.
Mhm.
And it's just having that hypersensitivity of knowing when it's like, say, the ego panicking, freaking out about something versus that consciousness saying, you might want to do this instead. You might want to go and do this. But I've made some really wacky decisions in my life that people didn't understand at the time. And sometimes I didn't either. And I have a lot of stories about that, but I know we're limited on time. But I look back and I go, well, I was always guided. I just didn't even realize that's what it was.
Yeah. And I love how you said that you could feel it in your body because I can identify with that. And
Mm-hmm.
I always look for that signature whenever I'm about to do something. Like, how does it feel in my body?
Mm-hmm.
Um, in a question I have about you helping people and working with people, what would that look like if somebody came to you? Who, first of all, like, who would you work with? Who would be the kinds of people that might,
So
benefit?
yeah. So I work with people who have started to, like, what I call seekers, right? And I tend to work with more those who've been on that seeking path for a while, right? So they're sort of like dabbling here, dabbling there, taking all these courses, and they haven't seen a lot of change, right? So, or they have only gotten to a plateau and they can't seem to get past that point. I actually have like a whole 16-week course on how to combine mindfulness presence with energy healing and to do practical application. And many people don't realize that that's all interconnected, right? So they don't realize that intuitive ability and our connection to all of that is very dependent on where we are internally, right? So where I have focused through all my awakening stuff really is the healing side, right? So you asked like about helping people, because I realize how powerful it is when we do that and look in the mirror and clear out our own stuff energetically, and that we all have that ability. I had this conversation with somebody yesterday who kept on saying, well, so and so healed me, so and so healed me. And I said, no, you healed yourself.
Mm.
And I said, I would say that my forte, my true forte is healing, but I don't heal people. I heal myself and I help people to access the frequencies and vibrations that they haven't yet remembered how to access themselves. And my goal is to help them to access that so then they can do it themselves.
Mhm.
Because my goal in working with people is getting them to really tap into their inner power, because we all have that infinite power. It's a matter of
Mhm.
how we access it. So working with me is I do sessions, I do like, group programs, I do classes. And honestly, I can do anything in the whole spectrum because it's all related down to that healing. But my focus is truly, a lot of people go into the energy healing and they're like, oh, I love this. And it becomes like this, I call it the dog and pony show, like how cool and flashy and it's fun and it's great and colorful and all these experiences start happening. But what I focus on is helping them to get mindful and present with themselves, because we tend to lose our bodies in that. And it's really important to really honor that.
Mhm.
And because that's our biggest message board, right? So I teach them to go into that, to access that, like get mindful with themselves, because a lot of times we forget the mindfulness and presence
Mhm.
first. Teach them a really powerful, fluid way of accessing that infinite energy in the quantum, you want to talk about quantum physics and the quantum field or source or however you want to put it. And combining that together to see how it practically applies in everyday life. So those are the people that want to do this, that want to really take the bull by the horns and run with it and get past their plateaus. Because I work with people who are just seekers. I've worked with
Mhm.
professional practitioners in other, in all these kind of related areas. And it's the way, it's changing the whole way that we see the world and we experience it, right? So anybody who wants to, who's sort of stuck and they're like, I've taken all these classes, I've read all these books, and yet I'm still only so, I'm only here and I'm still having these problems. Those are the people who I work absolutely amazingly with, because I can help them to find the places where they're stuck and show them how to unstuck themselves.
Yes, yes. And I think that that work is so beautiful, and I think it's much needed, Angela, because I believe with all my heart that, we humans are here, and as we awaken or as we change, we become change agents too, whether we actively do it like you're doing or we do it unknowingly. So I think that is beautiful. It really is. It's like it goes. There's I've had a bit of a turbulent relationship with religion, but one of the things that I still carry forward from when I've had to deconstruct my faith, but this Lord's Prayer, it says, on earth as it is in heaven. And I've always said that when we live out from that space of authenticity and what you're trying to do, help people discover who they are, their true nature, their higher self, I think that's what brings heaven to earth.
Mhm,
And I'm
absolutely.
yes, and I'm very appreciative of you and people like you that are, you know, bringing all this light into this world. So if somebody wanted to find out about your classes, and where would we know? Like if I wanted to know when you're having another class, how would
So
I
I
access?
am I am all over the internet, but I have a Linktree page that has all of my links.
Okay,
That's the easiest thing. So
and I
if you
will
go to
be
the
posting
Linktree,
that.
yes, that would be great, because that has all my social media and my I will post classes right on the Linktree page as well as on my site.
That's
But
that's awesome, Angela. I'll make sure that I have everything. And is there anything that you want to tell us before we sign off? Any last
s-
words from?
well, yeah, you can always you have all of that power within you. You have all that ability. And all of what we call supernatural is really just natural. That's what I always tell people. And it's a matter of getting rid of what I call the partitions and the boxes that prevent us from seeing things, you know. But I have a whole, like, I'm relaunching my YouTube channel that I've had for a while, and I'm calling it Changing the Story. Um, and I can't remember the slogan right this moment. It's changing the story, transforming consciousness or
Mhm.
something. I can't remember what it is,
Yeah.
but it's basically helping because it's still new. I just renamed it really within the last couple of weeks. And really it's because I want to do videos on helping people to see these things like much more naturally and
Mhm.
accepting them much more naturally. And it goes across the entire board. So I have a lot of experience also with, fitness and health and holistic health, and as well as all of this. So well, all of this feeds into our overall well-being.
Yeah.
And if we feel empowered to be able to know ourselves that clearly, I feel like that changes everything in our lives. And like you said, that bringing to heaven to earth, that's my goal.
Yes. I could feel that. And the other thing that I wanted to say too is thank you for being brave enough to share your story because you know, I think that when we share, that's partly how we normalize it, right? We're having this
Yes.
conversation. It gives permission to me when I have an experience like that. You're giving me permission to share it. Like, see, it's not scary. You could do it. I could
Yes.
do it. You could do it.
Yes. Yes. In fact, it was funny because I had a session with somebody yesterday, which was a very unusual session because usually we do some energy work or some kind of something, right? And literally the whole session, she just wanted to talk
Yeah.
and talk about her experience because she kept on saying things like, well, you're going to think I'm crazy. And I would say, there is no crazy to me. And that's my goal is I hold that space of non-judgment,
Yeah.
of knowing everything is possible.
Yeah.
And when you can do that, then people feel more comfortable with themselves to admit to themselves out loud sometimes when they're talking to me about things that they were afraid to admit before.
Yeah. Thank you, Angela. Thank you very much for coming on today. It's
You're
been a
welcome.
pleasure.
Yes, thank you.
And I hope I will see you in person, run into you somewhere, or have coffee sometime.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Thank you.